Bienvenidos a The Right Note, un nuevo espacio conservador para informar a toda nuestra comunidad hispanoamericana. En este programa conversaremos con el exdirector de comunicaciones del expresidente Donald Trump y el nuevo CEO de la plataforma Gettr, Jason Miller. Esperamos que esta conversación sea de su interés y no olviden suscribirse a todas nuestras redes sociales para recibir todo el contenido cada semana. Mr. Miller, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. My first question goes straight to the heart of things. Do you believe that President Biden has done an excellent job on making sure that former President Trump will be back in the Oval Office on 2024?
Well, I think so. And obviously, I'm someone who's a biased Trump supporter. But when you take a look at Joe Biden's most recent poll numbers and the fact that only 23% of the United States thinks that we're going in the right direction, then it's not just myself as a Trump partisan who's saying so. And one of the key demographics where the bottom has really fallen out for Joe Biden and the rest of the Democratic Party are with Latino Americans and with Hispanic Americans. And much of this trend away from the Democratic Party started in 2020 when Democrats embraced the lawlessness and the anti-police rhetoric that made so many Hispanic Americans and so many immigrants to our country fearful that the safety and security that the United States is supposed to offer would not be there for them and their families.
I see. November 2022 is going to be the key to the future of the balance of power in the country. With what we know today on the role of the mainstream media has played before on colluding with the Democrats Party and covering for this administration, how worried should the public be about the accuracy of what we're going to be presented before the elections by the mainstream media?
Fantastic question. And this is part of the reason why shows like yours are so important. In recent years, there's been a decentralization of media. People are less trusting and feel less secure in the traditional, what you say, the major broadcast houses. So ABC, NBC, CBS, and not even just with the proliferation of cable networks, but so much of the real voice, the real capturing the pulse of the people around the United States are on streaming shows such as yours, as well as even podcasts or in social media. And part of the reason why we launched Gettr was to make sure that political speech, your freedom of speech would never be shut down the way that it was in 2020 in advance of the election. And as we go forward, that we'll always have that freedom that makes us so unique as a country.
Okay, we have just witnessed how the leftist presidential candidate in Colombia, Gustavo Petro, has taken the majority of the vote, but not enough to become the president on the first round. But now, how concerned should the region be if on the second round, the right doesn't unite and the radical left take Colombia?
Well, this is very pivotal. In fact, in one of my Miller Live shows that we live streamed on Gettr last week, I said that Colombia might be the single most important election in the world in 2022. More important as far as to the lives of Americans than any single congressional race or any single Senate or even any single gubernatorial race because of Colombia's role and its history. And not only is Colombia the United States' strongest ally in South America, it's never had a leftist government. And you have a position right now where many people are looking down at, say, Uribe and Duque and viewing them as the establishment, as the status quo, and they want to change. So now Colombians are faced with two options. Either Gustavo Petro, who literally is a former terrorist and a rebel. And I laugh only because it's so farcical for most of the rest of the world to think that this man was literally with M19 was a rebel, and obviously M19 was very active in kidnapping and killing so many people in Colombia. On the other hand, you have Rodolfo Hernandez, who had only served the one term as the mayor of Bucaramanga, and is now running as essentially the outsider. They're calling, say he's the TikTok candidate, so to speak, which is great. And so you have two outsiders, but very, very different visions. We don't know necessarily what we'll get with Rodolfo, but having seen Gustavo Petro speak in person, having met him actually in person, I can tell you that his leftist ideas aren't just radical, they're quite actually scary.
Actually, last week we interviewed a citizen from Colombia who presented the first international criminal complaint both in the United States and Spain for crimes against humanity and terrorism against Gustavo Petro. How can the U.S. government consider this candidate, if elected, as a partner when he has been accused of these grave crimes and terrorism, having in mind, like you said, that Colombia is a strategic partner to the U.S. in terms of regional security and drug trafficking?
You know, it's a really important question because Colombia, not just because of their proximity to these far leftists or even socialism or autocratic regimes. Venezuela is right next door. You have Cuba that's nearby. But in fact, you look at China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has expanded into a number of different South and Central American countries. The one country that China wants to sink their claws into more than anyone in the Western Hemisphere is Colombia. That's because Colombia is right at that pivot point, whether it be for the natural resources. You look at oil, you look at coal, whether it be the agriculture, all of these things that China needs to help their economy, which is very much still a manufacturing-based economy, continue to grow. But when you look at Gustavo Petro, it is so different and so foreign to anything that the Colombian people have been fighting for decades. And what many friends in America and around the rest of the world might not realize is just what the people of Colombia have gone through in the last 30 or 40 years to try to bring safety and security to their country. And I've visited Bogota now twice this year. And almost every block, almost every street, people would point and say, that's where the bombing happened in this year, or this is where the terrorist attack happened in this year. It's something that's so rooted in the very culture of the Colombian people. I just can't imagine they take a step backwards. Now, Maria, you made a good observation in that Gustavo Petro received a plurality of the vote. He received 48% in the first round, and Rodolfo Hernandez received 28%, and Fico Gutierrez received 24%. Fico has now endorsed Rodolfo, and there have been several polls that I've seen now in the second round. One had Rodolfo leading by 2, one had Rodolfo leading by 8. But in a sign that we can never let our guard down, there was a poll that came out just a couple of days ago that had Gustavo Petro narrowly leading. I do get very concerned in Colombia for the areas that are still controlled by rebels, that there could be fraud and different things that happen at the ballot box. People, listen to me. This is the most important election in 2022. And if Gustavo Petro takes control of Colombia, it's going to be very bad for the Colombian people and everyone in the region.
I agree. Jason, I watched your live show on the Clinton lawyer's sentence. What do you have to say to Hispanics about this case? This is not covered in Univision or Telemundo or anywhere else.
It's very frustrating. And what it showed was, even though the lawyer was ultimately found not guilty, Michael Sussman, it did show that the Clinton campaign was behind the entire Russia hoax. And for a country such as the United States, where we pride ourselves on being first world, where we pride ourselves of having the rule of law and being really the guide light, the benchmark for everyone else to base their judicial systems on, it was a farce. And it's something that's very embarrassing as an American, that literally a made-up story like this, completely fabricated and made up, could be pushed and presented to the American people and effectively waste the first 2 years of President Trump's first term.
I see. And going back to the international arena, what do you think about Justin Trudeau's decision to introduce legislation to basically ban weapons in Canada after the massacre in Texas? Why is the progressives have a tendency to become authoritarians so quickly?
Well, that's my point exactly. I thought the progressives wanted everybody to be equal, to can't we all just get along? But what that's turned into, especially during the COVID pandemic, is that the progressives are using various excuses to seize more control. If you could ever imagine a right of center leader, say like a Donald Trump or anybody else, trying to do the things that Justin Trudeau has, whether it be seizing bank accounts, whether it be trying to seize firearms, weapons that people have a constitutional right to own, it'd be just such a completely foreign thought. But these progressive governments have become the most overarching, the most overreaching. And I'll point just on the free speech aspect. They take a look at the EU, with their digital act that they just passed. It'll take effect in January. You take a look at the UK with the online safety bill being discussed, and you take a look again even at what Justin Trudeau did to shut down the voices of the truckers in Canada, or even Joe Biden, what he did with his attempt to create the misinformation board and Nina Jankowicz, who wanted to be the czar of information. These are some really scary things, and I don't think George Orwell was wrong with his predictions. He was just off by a couple of decades.
And last question, Jason. Brazil presidential elections will be held on October 2nd. With 4 months to go, do you believe a candidate sentenced to 8 years in prison will establish an alliance with the far left and socialist party in Brazil to make this country another Venezuela?
Well, that's another great point. And I think that Jair Bolsonaro, who's up for re-election, facing Lula, who, as you referenced, served time for corruption. It's amazing that the media pressure is so anti-Bolsonaro and so supportive of Lula. What many Americans might not realize is that there is no such thing as the First Amendment. There is no guarantee of freedom of speech in Brazil. And in fact, I met the federal deputy, Carol Detoni, who's writing Brazil's legislation to try to make that a part of their constitution. And as an American, I believe, even myself, I've taken free speech entirely for granted. But President Bolsonaro is really the standard bearer when it comes to the populist movement around the world. And there's no greater adversary to President Bolsonaro than liberal publications such as The Economist, The Financial Times, all of these left of center outlets that want to remove him and want to blame all of the world's problems on President Bolsonaro. Here's the thing about President Bolsonaro. It very much reminds me of my old boss, President Trump, and that his support is so strong and so deep. I do think that the polls underestimate how well he will do. I think it'll probably head to a second round. And what Lula, at a certain point, he's going to have to start campaigning. Right now, he's doing very similar to Joe Biden, where he just allowed the media to be his proxy. It's essentially President Bolsonaro versus the media right now. At a certain point, Bolsonaro will turn the focus onto Lula, and people will say, do we want to go back to handing things to a crook, or do we want to have things with a reformer, someone who you can actually count on, like President Bolsonaro? That decision ultimately will be up to the people of Brazil. And I'll be back in Brazil later this week, where I'm very excited to make my second visit. And other than the United States, Brazil is my favorite country in the world, and I very much love it, and I can't wait to be back.
Well, thank you for your time, Jason, and thank you for your doing to protect everybody else's constitutional rights.
Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate what you're doing here and allowing additional people, especially in the Hispanic and Latino American communities, to have an additional voice for telling the truth and not forcing it to be fed to the people of the country simply by the fake news media.
Thank you. We'll hope to have you back sometime soon. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.